On the 31st of December 1968, the Tupolev Tu-144 took to the skies for the first time. This beautiful supersonic aircraft, the first supersonic passenger aircraft ever to be created, was a treasured project of the Soviet Union. Proof that they could technologically outpace their Western rivals. It was also, however, fatally flawed. Supersonic flight made a lot of sense for the Soviet Union. Unlike in other, smaller countries, supersonic aircraft would be useful here for both domestic and international flights. Many domestic flights would be over sparsely populated areas. Supersonic planes were likely to be extremely noisy, meaning that other countries could only use them for routes that were mainly over water. The Soviet Union would be one of few countries that could reasonably use supersonic craft for flights over land, something that the government of the time believed could do wonders for the economy. In addition to the predicted economic advantages for the Soviet Union, the development of supersonic flight was also a matter of national pride. In the aftermath of World War II, the Soviet Union and its allies were in fierce competition with the United States and its allies to see who would become the dominant global superpower. Being the first to develop and put to use new technologies, like supersonic flight, was a vital part of this. As it transpired, the Soviet Union was the first, albeit by a narrow margin. The Tu-144 first took to the skies on the very last day of 1968, just 2 months before the European Concorde supersonic aircraft did the same. At a time when most passenger planes had only just started using jet engines instead of propellers, the Tu-144 attracted a lot of attention. In terms of outward appearance, the Tu-144 and Concorde were uncannily similar. This was in large part because of the constraints that supersonic travel put on aircraft design. Any supersonic aircraft would have to have a narrow profile, an aerodynamic shape, and a pointed nose cone. The Soviet Tu-144 could be easily told apart from the Concorde, however, by the presence of 2 winglets, also known as canards, just behind the cockpit. Despite this difference, some commentators would jokingly refer to the plane as the Concordski, due to its similar appearance. The Tu-144 was the first to fly, but both it and Concorde were a long way off being ready to carry passengers. The development of both aircraft continued apace into the 1970s, but due to the events of the 3rd of June 1973, it would ultimately be Concorde that was first to enter service as a commercial aircraft. The 3rd of June 1973 was the final day of the Paris Air Show at the Paris-Le Bourget airport in France. This show, which takes place every other year, is a huge event during which many military and commercial aircraft are displayed. This year, both the Tu-144 and Concorde would be among them. There was a clear rivalry between the pilots of the 2 planes. Soviet pilot Mikhail Kozlov said in an interview, "Just wait until you see us fly. Then you'll see something." He seemed to be stating his intention to outfly the pilots of Concorde. At first, it seemed like this might be possible. The Concorde pilots had put on a confident but not exceptionally impressive display of the plane's capabilities earlier in the day. The Tu-144 demonstration flight, at least in its first minutes, was much more crowd-pleasing. It featured a number of high-speed aerobatic maneuvers which culminated in a steep upward climb. At just 600 meters, or around 2,000 feet above the ground, however, the plane stalled. The climb became a nosedive, and as the pilots attempted desperately to pull up, part of the left wing detached and the plane violently disintegrated. The wreckage, now aflame, crashed into a nearby village. 8 people on the ground were killed, as well as all 6 crew on board the Tu-144. 60 people sustained injuries, and 15 buildings were completely destroyed. An investigation was carried out by the French military, who took charge because it had been an experimental, not a conventional plane. From the outset, it was a difficult task. There was some degree of distrust between the Soviet and French authorities, with the Soviets raising objections to some of the findings. It was ultimately agreed that the design of the aircraft was not to blame for the accident. In fact, no definitive assessment as to what had caused the crash was issued. There were only theories. A last-minute change to the flight plan and poor communication from air traffic control might have confused the pilots. The pilots might have been distracted by the operation of a video camera they were asked to take along for promotional purposes. Or a nearby French aircraft which the pilots of the Tu-144 had not known about might have surprised them into taking unnecessary evasive maneuvers. Whatever the cause, in the aftermath of the crash, enthusiasm for the Tu-144 within the Soviet Union fell dramatically. The project was not abandoned altogether, but it became a much lower priority. When it finally did start carrying passengers in 1977, it was put into service on a little-used route between Moscow and Almaty in Kazakhstan. It was rare for these flights to be fully booked. Passengers who did purchase a ticket were treated to a unique experience. While the plane was incredibly fast, it was also unbelievably noisy, thanks to its military-style afterburner jet engines. Some passengers reported having to communicate with flight attendants by means of written notes, as it was simply too loud to hear anything that was said. Landings were also interesting affairs. The Tu-144 was one of the last commercial aircrafts to use parachutes to assist with braking. Not many flights on board the Tu-144 went smoothly. Over the 102 flights made during the plane's commercial lifespan, there were 226 systems failures, 80 of which were serious enough to affect the scheduling of a flight. As a safety precaution, the lead designer of the Tu-144, Alexei Tupolev, was required to personally inspect the aircraft before each and every flight, before making a decision in cooperation with government ministers as to whether the Tu-144 could fly. On one occasion, on the 25th of January 1978, the unreliable nature of the Tu-144 developed into a crisis. Several systems on board an aircraft that was scheduled to fly failed before takeoff. None were critical, and there happened to be several high-profile foreign journalists booked to fly. It was decided that it would damage the Tu-144's reputation, and by extension the reputation of the Soviet Union, to cancel the flight at the last minute. As such, it went ahead as planned, only for more than a dozen other systems to fail in flight. The landing gear appeared to be one of the affected systems. On the ground, the authorities began preparing for the worst, while on the plane, crew attempted to hide the fact that anything was amiss from passengers. A loud alarm which the pilots could not deactivate was dealt with simply by stuffing a pillow into the alarm horn to muffle it. The aircraft ultimately landed without incident, but this dramatic near-emergency served to demonstrate just how unreliable it could be. At this time, Soviet authorities had come to accept that the Tu-144 wasn't going to be economically viable in the long term. It was neither popular enough nor fuel efficient enough to make sense as an ongoing passenger-carrying project. Nonetheless, development continued with the view that the technological development and prestige of the project would be worth the high cost. This all changed on the 23rd of May 1978. On this day, a newly built Tu-144 was scheduled to take its 6th ever test flight. With 8 crew members on board, it departed from Ramenskoye Airport near Moscow at around 5:30 p.m. The aircraft handled several tests without issue, until the crew attempted to turn on and test an auxiliary power unit, or APU. The APU did not work, and just a few minutes after attempting to switch it on, fire alarms started sounding throughout the aircraft. First one engine and then another failed. As the crew attempted to return to the airport for an emergency landing, thick smoke and a strong smell of burning infiltrated the cockpit. Another engine failed, leaving just one functional engine. there was no way that they would make it back to the airport, and so the crew decided to attempt a risky emergency landing in a field. They brought the plane down with the landing gear retracted and managed to land it on its belly. As it skidded to a halt, however, the nose cone hit an obstacle and was smashed back into the cockpit, instantly killing 2 flight engineers. The remaining 6 crew members were able to evacuate the aircraft. From outside, they could see that it was on fire, and could only watch as the flames consumed the wreckage while they waited for emergency equipment to reach their remote location. In the aftermath of this second crash of a Tu-144, an investigation found that a new and experimental fuel pipeline had failed, leading to a leak. Fuel had built up in several compartments of the aircraft, and when the crew attempted to switch on the APU, it had provided the spark necessary to ignite the lingering fuel vapors, starting the fire which doomed the plane. The crew might have been able to determine that there was a fuel leak by close observation of their instruments. However, they knew that in this newly built aircraft the fuel gauges had not yet been calibrated, and so wrote off any unusual readings they observed. This second crash caused belief in the Tu-144 as a viable supersonic plane to diminish even further. It was soon taken out of regular service. Some planes were used to transport mail or freight for a few years before development was completely stopped in 1983. The remaining Tu-144s were scrapped or consigned to museums, never to be used to transport passengers again. As tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States eased towards the end of the 20th century, some of these retired planes were put to use for research and training purposes. The Soviet space program used them to train shuttle pilots, and at least one Tu-144 was used for research purposes by NASA, a collaboration that would have been unthinkable at the height of the Cold War. Now the Tu-144, like the Concorde, exists only in museums and archives, and in the memories of people who rode or flew in one. It was a significantly flawed aircraft, produced at a time of great political tension. An ambitious project, but one that would ultimately be ended by not one, but 2 devastating accidents.